This audio is intended for relaxation and sleep support. Please do not listen while driving or operating heavy machinery. Find a safe, comfortable place to rest and allow yourself to drift peacefully. Tonight, we wander through Bryce Canyon. The light changed everything, and nothing at all. The sun crest the ridge like a quiet decision, spilling soft gold down the canyon walls. The hoodoos shimmered with warmth, transformed from night's silver sculptures into amber-lit storytellers. Each rock now stood lit from within, as though holding a secret too beautiful to say out loud. You sat with your tea, steam curling upward into the crisp morning air. The heat seeped into your hands, your fingers, your chest. It was a gentle invitation to return, not just to waking, but to presence. There is a hush in the high desert that feels like a secret being passed from one red rock to another. The sun is slowly lowering itself into the orange cradle of the horizon, and the spires of Bryce Canyon, the hoodoos, are bathed in molten gold. Their long shadows stretch across the dusty trails, like a choir of stone figures, frozen mid-song, waiting for someone who understands their language to come and listen. Tonight, that someone is you. You arrived here just before twilight, stepping out of your car onto a gravel overlook where the air smelled faintly of sun-baked pine and ancient dust. The day's heat was still lingering like a farewell hug, warming your shoulders as you stood and looked out across the canyon's surreal formations. It felt less like geology and more like sculpture, or even music, made visible, rising and falling in impossible shapes that echoed back through time. Your guide is a local park ranger named Elsie, a soft-spoken woman with sun-freckled arms and a calm presence, like someone who has spent years listening to the land. She met you with a quiet nod, handed you a thermos of warm herbal tea, and gestured toward the path without a word. No grand introductions, no itinerary, just an understanding that you were here to walk, to listen, and to let the canyon do what it does best: slow the mind and soften the heart. You took your first step down the path, your boots crunching gently on the gravel as the hoodoos seemed to lean in ever so slightly, like a crowd of elders preparing to share old stories. The trail wound downward in soft switchbacks, each turn unveiling a new vista. Pink cliffs glowing under dusk, narrow passageways between towering pillars, the occasional bluebird flitting past in a final burst of evening energy. Elsie moved ahead of you, not quickly, but with the steady rhythm of someone who trusts the land to guide her. You followed, sipping from your thermos, now and then, the tea grounding you as your other senses reached outward. The air cooled with every step into the canyon, wrapping around your neck and cheeks like a silk scarf, dipped in sage and cedar. Most people think the rocks are silent, Elsie said, her voice barely louder than the wind. But they're not. They just speak slowly. They need quiet listeners. You nodded, unsure what to say, but you could feel it too, that pulse of quiet beneath the surface. It wasn't about hearing with your ears. It was a deeper kind of listening, a slowing down, a tuning in. As you walked farther into the canyon, your thoughts stopped rushing. They didn't disappear, but they softened, spreading out like ripples in a calm pool. You reached a narrow slot between the rocks, the trail flanked on either side by high, crimson walls, etched with delicate patterns from thousands of years of wind and rain. You paused there, running your hand along the stone, warm from the day's sun, rough in texture, but strangely soothing. The rocks were whispering something, though the words were made of memory and silence. I like this spot, Elsie said, turning to you. People don't rush here. They linger. It's like the canyon slows their feet without them noticing. You could see why. Something about the space made you want to breathe slower, sit down, and just be. So you did. There, on a smooth slab of stone, you settled in with your back against the wall. The ground beneath you held the heat of the day, and above you, the sky deepened from blue to lavender, then into soft twilight gray. One by one, the stars began to appear, first as pinpricks, then as quiet lanterns, until the sky was scattered with light, like quartz crystals caught in velvet. Elsie sat nearby, her eyes closed. Not asleep, just attuned. You closed your own eyes for a moment, too, letting your breath find its rhythm. In, out. No need to shape it. No need to force anything. Just the steady, quiet rhythm of being. The wind moved gently through the canyon, like a breath that the earth was taking, and the rocks responded with a low, echoing murmur, like the deep resonance of a choir humming far underground. You remembered something from earlier, a plaque you'd passed near the trailhead. It said the hoodoos were once believed to be ancient beings, frozen by magic for misdeeds. Standing here now, they didn't feel cursed. They felt watchful, present, not frozen, but still, as if they were waiting, guarding something sacred that required silence and patience to understand. Elsie finally opened her eyes and smiled at you. Not the kind of smile that asks anything of you, but the kind that says, "You're doing just fine." "We call this the amphitheater," she said quietly, "because the wind bounces just right, and the sound of a single voice can echo for miles." You imagine that, standing alone and singing into the canyon, your voice catching and climbing along the stone pillars, like a wild thing set free. Maybe not tonight. Maybe someday. For now, this was enough. The moment held steady, stillness without urgency. beauty without need. You could feel it settle in your chest, not like a weight, but like a root, the kind that holds you steady when the world feels too fast. Eventually, you rose again and continued walking, this time in silence. The moon was climbing now, casting silver outlines across the hoodoos. They glowed in pale shades of alabaster and rose, as if the sun had left behind a parting gift. Even the stars seemed to lean in closer, curious about your quiet footsteps. At a bend in the path, you came to a natural alcove with a view of the entire canyon below. Elsie lit a small lantern, not bright, just enough to make the tea in your thermos glow again, and sat down cross-legged. You joined her, legs stretched out before you, shoulders finally softening fully. Sometimes I imagine they're singing, Elsie said, gazing out over the spires. All the rocks. A harmony too slow for us to hear. If we stay long enough, maybe we can catch a note or two. You nodded slowly, the image wrapping itself around your heart like a lullaby. You looked out across Bryce Canyon, its red spires glowing in the hush of night, and felt the strange comfort of being very small in a very beautiful place. No phones, no clocks, no need to name what you were feeling. Just breath, rock, sky, and the slow, silent song of stone. And as your eyes grew heavier and the warmth of the tea softened the edge of your thoughts, you let yourself settle fully into the quiet, into the feeling of being held by the earth itself. You didn't need to do anything. The rocks would keep watch. The choir would keep singing. And you could rest. The trail continued downward into Bryce Canyon's embrace. The world above slowly folding itself away, like the cover of a worn storybook closing for the night. Behind you, the glow from the rim had faded into deep twilight blues, and before you, the path dipped into shadows that shimmered with a soft gleam of moonlight. Elsie walked just ahead of you again, the lantern in her hand casting a small halo of amber light around your footsteps. It wasn't enough to brighten the whole world, only enough to make you feel safe exactly where you were. A quiet lesson, perhaps, from the canyon itself. You don't need to see the entire journey, just the next few steps. As you descended deeper, the air cooled further. The rocks around you no longer flamed with sunset, but held a softer presence, like ancient guardians wrapped in silvery cloaks, their edges smooth and luminous. The hoodoos stretched toward the sky in impossible shapes, their tops catching glimmers of starlight, as if wearing crowns spun from dreams. I always think the canyon feels different at night, Elsie said quietly. It's more gentle, like it exhales. You could feel that too. The way the air moved slower, the way each sound seemed softer, more intentional. Your boots made the faintest crunch on the gravel, and even your breath sounded like part of the landscape. A lullaby woven into the wind. You passed a grove of pinyon pines, their needles dark against the stars, their trunks twisted like dancers mid-motion. The scent of pine and juniper floated on the air, earthy and clean, the kind of smell that reminded you that nature doesn't try to impress. It just is. Elsie stopped near a small outcrop and waited for you to catch up. Here, she said, pointing upward. You followed her gaze to a narrow cleft in the rock where the sky was framed perfectly between two hoodoos. The moon had risen high enough to nestle right in the gap, like a pearl balanced between two red fingers of stone. They call that the Moon Gate, Elsie said. Local name, not on any official maps. But folks who walk the trails at night always stop here. It did feel special, that sliver of sky captured in stone. You stood beside her in silence, letting your body relax completely. You didn't need to think. You didn't need to plan. There was nowhere to be, except here. You sat down again, this time on a patch of soft sand at the base of the gate. Elsie joined you without speaking. The lantern dimmed to a low flicker. You both leaned back against the rocks, looking up. The sky was more crowded with stars now than you could ever remember seeing. Whole constellations twinkled above, patterns passed down through centuries by people who once walked these same paths. You wondered what stories they told, what names they gave the rocks, whether they sat here on cool desert nights, listening for the song in the stone. A breeze passed through, gentle but insistent, and you pulled your jacket tighter around your shoulders. The cold wasn't biting. It was clean, almost invigorating. Like the canyon was brushing away what you didn't need to carry anymore. You ever notice how being out here makes you forget time? Elsie asked softly, her voice low enough not to disturb the hush. You nodded. You couldn't even say what day it was right now. And you didn't mind. The stillness wrapped around you like a cocoon. Far below, an owl called out, a low whoo that seemed to bounce off the rocks and multiply. You listened as it echoed between stone walls and spiraled upward into the open sky. Elsie smiled at the sound. Night singers, she murmured. Even out here, there's always someone awake. You let your eyes drift closed for a moment, just listening. The wind, the call of the owl, the rustle of pine branches swaying gently somewhere behind you. Beneath it all, the low, low murmur you'd first noticed earlier. The slow, secret music of the canyon. Not music with notes. Not something you could hum or record. A deep resonance that settled into your bones the longer you sat still. As if your body was remembering a rhythm older than clocks. You stayed like that a long while. When you finally stood again, it was with no rush. Your legs felt loose and your mind lighter, like you'd set something down and forgotten what it was. The moon gate behind you still cradled its silver jewel, and the path ahead was easy now, wider, lined with soft grasses that shone faintly under the stars. As you walked again, You passed formations with names etched into wooden signs. Thor's Hammer, Queen's Garden, Silent City. Each name felt like a quiet invitation, not just to see, but to feel, to wonder. The Silent City especially struck you. A collection of hoodoos close together, like a cluster of old souls caught in mid-conversation, leaning toward one another with centuries of secrets. You stopped at the edge of the trail and stared into the crowd of stone. In the distance, the faintest rustle. Not wind this time. Something else. Almost like humming. You looked to Elsie, who was watching you with a kind smile. That's why we call them the rock choir, she said, nodding toward the formations. Some people say when the wind hits just right, the canyon sings. Not loudly, not in a way you'd expect, but enough that you feel it. You believed her. Even without the wind, you felt it. The hum beneath your feet, the low, resonant vibration in the soles of your boots, the melody of stillness. And maybe it wasn't just the canyon. Maybe it was you. Your heartbeat slower now, your breath quieter. The constant inner chatter softened into a steady hush, like static, tuning into a clear frequency. You were no longer just visiting this place. You were part of it. Elsie pointed ahead. There's a spot I want to show you, she said. Good for dreaming. The path narrowed again, this time winding up a gentle slope that led to a flat perch overlooking the entire canyon. You followed her, the ascent easy in the cool night air, until you stood at the edge of the world. Or at least it felt like it. Below you, spires and shadows, stone and silence, stretching out in every direction like the slow unfolding of a story told entirely in stillness. Above you, constellations arched overhead in their grand, slow spin. And inside you, peace, complete, simple, real. Elsie laid out a blanket on the ground and sat, cross-legged once again, as if this was a ritual she'd done 100 times. You joined her. You didn't speak. You didn't need to. You just sat there and listened and dreamed. And slowly, let yourself begin to fall into that hush. A falling that felt like rising, like becoming more of yourself by doing less, like remembering something your body always knew. The choir of the canyon sang on in its slow and steady harmony. And you rested, because tonight the canyon would sing for you. You woke slowly, not from sleep, but from that velvety in-between place, the one where the line between body and land feels soft. The perch you'd settled on with Elsie was still and quiet, warmed just enough by the heat retained in the rocks. Above you, the stars hadn't shifted much, but a faint blue glow on the farthest ridge suggested that night was tipping towards its slow undoing. Elsie was still beside you, legs stretched out now, eyes half closed. You couldn't tell if she dozed or just stayed in silence, but her face held the same peace you'd begun to feel growing in your own chest. Steady, unbothered, at ease. "Dream anything?" she asked, her voice wrapped in a yawn. You thought about it. You weren't sure if what you felt counted as a dream, but there had been impressions, shapes, feelings. One moment you were floating among the stars. The next you were standing at the bottom of the canyon with stone towers stretching above you, like cathedrals. Somewhere in that quiet, you remembered hearing footsteps, soft, echoing, not your own. "I think I dreamed I was walking," you said, "but not alone." Elsie nodded slowly. "That happens," she said, "especially out here. A lot of stories passed down in this dust." She stood and brushed off her pants, then turned toward a smaller path that veered slightly off the main trail. There was no signpost this time, just the hush of the canyon, continuing, as if waiting for you to follow. He rose and walked beside her, and the two of you stepped into a section of the park that felt even older than what had come before. The rocks were darker here, striped in hues of deep rust, ochre, and violet gray. The path was narrower and lined with tiny fossils pressed into stone. They weren't obvious, not flashy, but they appeared when the light hit just right. Spiraled shells, fern-like impressions, tiny ripples from ancient lake beds. "This part's my favorite," Elsie said softly. "It's not on any tour map. Not closed off either. Just overlooked. Most people stop at the big photo spots. But here's where the canyon feels like memory." You bent down to look at one of the fossil spirals, perfectly preserved in the stone. A swirl of time caught mid-turn. You brushed your fingers lightly over it and felt the faintest vibration. No sound, just a hum, like a string being plucked in some deeper dimension. You looked up at Elsie. "Do you think the rocks remember us?" you asked. She smiled, a little sad, but a little amused too. "Oh, they remember everything," she said. "Not the way we think about memory. They don't hold grudges. They don't replay conversations. They just hold presence, impressions, like fingerprints left by existence." You turned that over in your mind as you walked. The idea that every step you took became part of the canyon, not because it changed the land, but because the land welcomed it, welcomed you. It didn't ask you to be anything but exactly what you were. The trail opened slightly, and you came to a small alcove where the walls curled in gently. Inside the stone was a natural echo, just subtle enough that your breath came back to you as a whisper. Elsie gestured for you to sit. "I come here when I've got something stuck in my chest," she said, "words that need releasing, or things I need to hear back. Just a little softer." You nodded, sat, and faced the curve of the wall. It felt like being in a small chapel, but without doors or doctrine, just stone and sky and quiet. You closed your eyes and let a few thoughts rise. Some old worries, some soft sadnesses, a few unnamed aches. Then, softly, you spoke. Not loud, not for performance, just a few true things. Words that needed air, maybe even ones you hadn't dared say out loud before. But here, in this ancient place, there was no judgment, no pressure, just the soft returning echo of your own voice, gentler on the rebound. Elsie stayed quiet, letting you empty out what needed emptying. You leaned back against the rock and let your breath catch up with you. The release was subtle, not dramatic, but real, like a weight had shifted an inch off your shoulders. I think that's enough, you said, and she nodded. The path that followed was wide and sloped gently upward. As you walked, you noticed the shift again. The canyon was breathing differently. Not heavier, not louder, just deeper. The wind moved through narrow arches in the rocks and created soft tones, like the resonance of a flute or the low chord of a cello. You stopped once to listen, and it truly did sound like music, even if your mind couldn't capture a melody. Elsie smiled when she saw you pause. You're starting to hear it, she said. The rock choir. You walked in silence again, letting that phrase settle in. The rock choir. Not a metaphor, not a poetic stretch. Something literal, if you let it be. Suddenly, the canyon wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. Not in a way that needed anything from you. Not attention or applause, but alive, like a deep ocean, like the wind. Constant, wise, still singing after all this time. At the top of the slope, Elsie stopped beside a natural arch carved into the ridge. Through it, you could see the full sweep of Bryce Canyon, bathed in silver and blue. You'll want to remember this view, she said, but not with a photo. You knew what she meant. This wasn't a moment to capture. It was a moment to absorb. So you stood there, still and unhurried. The sky stretched out overhead in inky velvet, stars glittering like polished stones. The hoodoos below shimmered in moonlight, casting layered shadows that moved with the breeze. It looked like a still image, but you knew better. Everything here was in motion, just on a scale too slow for the hurried world to notice. Not for you. Not anymore. You stayed until the breeze shifted, and the canyon's whisper returned. Soft, low, grounding. Then you turned back toward the trail, ready to descend once more, carrying the echo with you in your breath, your bones, your heartbeat. And the choir continued. Quiet, strong, endless. There's a point in any long walk when the movement becomes automatic, when the feet understand the path better than the mind. You had reached that part of the journey now. The wind trailed behind you like a quiet companion. The rocks ahead seemed to part just enough to welcome you forward, one step at a time. You were no longer thinking in words. Thoughts drifted through like clouds, slow and soft, casting shadows that didn't linger. There was no rush, no checklist, only the rhythm of your breath and the gentle sound of boots brushing gravel. Elsie walked a few paces ahead, her lantern swinging lightly at her side. The glow was faint now, barely cutting through the darkness, but it was enough. It reminded you of a lighthouse, not meant to fully illuminate, just to guide. And in this vast desert cathedral, the flicker of a small light was all it took to feel safe. The trail dipped again, curling into a sheltered hollow, where the air held stillness, like a sacred thing. A circle of flat stones ringed the space, and one larger stone stood at the center, wide and smooth, like a stage made by the canyon itself. Elsie paused, then turned to you. "This is where I bring the people who forget they belong," she said simply. You didn't ask her to explain. You understood. The world has a way of making people feel too much, or not enough. Too loud, too quiet, too soft, too much space taken, or not enough claimed. But here, in this hidden bowl of sandstone and starlight, there was no such measurement, no expectation, only presence. You walked to the central stone and sat. The surface was warm beneath you, having absorbed the memory of sun earlier in the day. Around you, the canyon walls rose in a protective curve, like cupped hands holding you gently in place. The stars above were bright, but not glaring, just enough to remind you that you were under something vast. And that vastness wasn't cold or indifferent, it was kind. Elsie took a seat nearby and placed the lantern in the center. The light flickered and cast long shadows on the surrounding rock, dancing like echoes of forgotten stories. I like to think this place holds the breath of everyone who's ever sat here, she said softly. All their worries, their hopes, their silent prayers. The stone remembers, without judgment. You nodded, your own breath settling into a slower rhythm again. The wind stirred once more, this time weaving around the hollow in a spiral. It lifted fine grains of dust that shimmered like silver threads in the lantern light, before settling again. You closed your eyes and listened. The choir returned, not as music this time, but as rhythm. The beat of the earth beneath you, the stretch and shift of ancient stone. A harmony so slow, so deep, it could only be felt, not heard. For a while, there was nothing else. Just you, the breath of the canyon, and the slow turning of the stars overhead. Elsie spoke again, her voice low, almost part of the wind. I used to think I needed to be louder, bigger, brighter, like I had to be fight to be seen. She paused. This canyon, it taught me that presence isn't noise. It's truth. And truth doesn't shout. It resonates. You let that settle into you. Presence. Truth. It wasn't about becoming anything. It was about uncovering, peeling back the layers of worry, and should, and not yet, until only this steady thrum of your being remained. You opened your eyes and looked up. A shooting star cut across the sky, brief and bright. Neither of you spoke. No need to make a wish. You were already here. Eventually, Elsie rose and dimmed the lantern further. The glow faded to a warm ember, just enough to light the path back to the main trail. "We'll camp just ahead," she said. "Nothing fancy. Just a tarp, some blankets, and a sky full of dreams." That sounded perfect. You followed her around a bend in the path, where the canyon opened into a small plateau. The ground here was soft with sand and scattered pine needles. A thick wool blanket had already been laid out beside a small fold of gear. Simple, but cozy. A place to rest. Elsie busied herself unrolling another blanket, but you simply stood there a moment longer, taking in the scene. The hoodoos circled the plateau at a respectful distance, as if giving you privacy, while still keeping watch. The air was cool and dry. The stars above were beginning to shift, inching toward the curve of morning. There was that feeling again, belonging, not earned, not awarded, just given, a welcome without ceremony. You lay down slowly on the blanket, the fabric soft against your skin, the ground firm beneath your body in a comforting way. As you adjusted, the last of the canyon's warmth pressed against your back. A memory of sunlight that hadn't quite let go. Elsie stretched out nearby. Not too close. Just there. A presence. A witness. The lantern was turned low, casting golden shadows against her face. For a long moment, neither of you spoke. Then, almost too quietly to be heard, she murmured, "You're part of the choir now." And with that, the night wrapped its arms around you. The sky stretched wide. The canyon began to hum its slow lullaby once more. You didn't resist sleep. You didn't reach for thoughts. You simply rested. And the choir, stone, sky, soul, sang on. Sometime in the middle of the night, he stirred, not fully awake, not truly asleep, but resting in that rare and peaceful space where dreams meet the edge of awareness. The stars above you had shifted, drawing slow patterns across the sky. The Milky Way was directly overhead now, a pale ribbon of light stretching from one horizon to the other. The canyon was silent, in the human sense, but not empty, not at all. The earth beneath your blanket was breathing. Not literally, but rhythmically. You could feel the slow expansion of time, the hush of wind carving ancient stone, the nearly imperceptible movement of a world that had always been alive in its own language. You nestled deeper into the warmth, eyes still half asleep, letting the sensation washed through you. Nearby, the lantern had gone out completely, and the glow of the sky had taken over. Everything was cast in a cool, silvery hue, so soft it made the rocks look like sculpture, like memory, like a song paused in mid-note. Elsie hadn't moved. She was curled beneath her blanket, arm flung loosely over her pack, a peaceful expression on her face. You wondered if she dreamed of sandstone corridors and echoing calls, or if she simply drifted along with the rhythm of this canyon she knew so well. Above you, a light breeze stirred the pine needles. They whispered to one another in ancient symbols. Wind-worn and lovely, like old women in rocking chairs, swapping lullabies. Your body was perfectly still. You didn't need to move. The quiet itself was moving through you. Thought had slowed so much, it felt like starlight. Soft, constant, too far away to hurt you. And then slowly, the canyon began to sing again. Not with voices, but with resonance. It started as a filling in your ribs, a gentle vibration, like standing near a deep cello, or placing your hand on a purring animal. A steady hum, low and wide. Then it shifted, became layered. The wind joined in, tracing the edges of the hoodoos and slipping through narrow cracks, creating tones that danced just at the edge of melody. You heard it, not with your ears exactly, but with your presence. A harmony of stillness. A choir not made of people, but of stone and space and time. And you belonged to it. You had been welcomed into the choir, not by invitation, but by surrender, by quieting yourself enough to hear what had always been singing. You closed your eyes and let it surround you. The hush of it held weight, not heavy, but meaningful. A lullaby, not meant to distract, but to ground. And maybe, just maybe, this was what the canyon offered most. A place to stop performing, to stop reaching, to stop chasing a version of peace, always just out of grasp. Because here, right here, on the sand, beneath the sky, you already were peace. Nothing needed fixing, nothing needed proving. The canyon wasn't asking you to be anything but exactly what you were. Soft, present, enough. Time passed, though you didn't count it. You floated in and out of thought, in and out of sleep, carried by the music that wasn't music, held by the lull of stone and star and earth. Eventually, the sky began to shift. The black softened to navy, the navy to indigo. And then, just along the farthest ridge of rock, a line of delicate silver appeared. Not dawn, not yet, but the promise of it, the first breath of morning. Elsie stirred beside you and sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. The best part's about to start, she said softly, and you both turned to face the east. The stars began to dim, blinking out one by one, like lanterns, being gently snuffed. The silence deepened, not as absence, but as awe. You sat up, wrapped your blanket around your shoulders, and held your breath for the moment just before light arrives. First, a warm blush across the lowest part of the sky. Then, golden hues melting upward into coral, rose, and apricot. The first rays touched the tops of the hoodoos, and the rocks lit up like stained glass. Red and orange and honey, like a choir singing its opening chord. And there it was again, the feeling, the resonance. The canyon didn't sing with sound, it sang with light. The warmth of morning touched your face and filled your chest. You hadn't realized how deeply your body had relaxed, how fully you had let go, until the sunlight kissed your skin and reminded you you are still here, awake, alive, whole. Elsie handed you a cup of warm tea she'd poured from the thermos, an herbal blend, earthy and grounding. You held it in both hands and sipped slowly, watching the sun rise over Bryce Canyon like a curtain lifting on the most sacred of stages. Neither of you spoke. The silence didn't need filling. The choir sang on, and you, wrapped in warmth and sunrise and stillness, realized you weren't just a visitor here. You had become part of the song. Even the stars are rooting for your rest. You are safe. You are welcome. You are whole. Tonight, your only job is to be. Good night.